Good evening, Trump's family. Welcome back to my channel. Thank you for joining me. How are you? Have a good night, everyone, and God bless you. Alright, now we will come to today's news. Folks, we've got some important things coming out of the Supreme Court. The most important having to do with the electoral argument. And that's gonna fly in the face of the DOJ and the January 6th committee and insurrection and all that kind of stuff. Folks, let me share you some real quick statistics with you from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. There's something wacky here. According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, the number of excess deaths in 2022 has already increased, which is more than the average of previous years. The number of deaths that occurred by June 30th and were reported by August 31st and 2021 was just shy of 93,000. This was an increase of almost 14,000 over the historical average. That's about a 17% increase. For the month of June alone, there was almost 17,000 deaths are reported in Australia. That was a 16.8% increase. I wonder what could possibly have happened in 2022. That the numbers would be so high? I don't know. So weird thing going on, folks. I don't know you. But it's not generally that we have this huge increase in deaths. People can say the pandemic, but that wasn't 2020. They scared us, the pandemic, but in 2020 seems to have a lot less deaths in the last year and a half or so. I just don't understand what could possibly have happened since the beginning of 2021. Where we have these increase in deaths. Oh, yeah. And also increase of these like unknown deaths and deaths of young and athletic people due to heart issues. I just wish we can get to the bottom of that and find out what that's all about. I'm sure there's nothing to see there, folks. I'm sure it's just some weird coinkydink. Alright, Joe Biden leaving the White House talks to the press. And this is what he has to say. Puerto Rico, because they haven't been taking very good care of Brian, I'd seen it earlier. I'm heading to Puerto Rico, because they haven't been taken very good care of. And they're trying like hell to catch up on the last hurricane. I want to see the state of affairs today and make sure we push everything we can. So supposedly Joe Biden cares about everybody. But he's going to Puerto Rico after him. Better late than never. Not. If you think that he's gonna be able to help, that it's better late than never. But isn't that curious that he would go after in an eon ended a few days ago? And even strangers that he admits that there's failure in Puerto Rico? They haven't been taken very good care of. Whose fault is that? Joe? Aren't you the leader of the country? Aren't you the executive? Didn't you convince everybody with all of that campaigning? You didn't. Oh, no, Diggs. You give this everybody with all of those? No, didn't do that either. Didn't your people and the press convince people for you at 1 million nod, wink wink? While you were in the basement that you were going to be the great executive, the great president of the United States. How curious. Let me tell you who's doing a hell of a job. And that's Ron DeSantis. Much to the chagrin of the haters. This is how evil, wicked, and vile the Marxists are. The mainstream media as the Democrats are and the establishment rhinos. They're kind of pissed off that Ron DeSantis is doing a bang-up job. No pun intended, maybe pun intended. Post-hurricane. Before we get to that, let's talk about the number of casualties in this. This is not good news. On Friday, officials of the death toll was at least 21 for the state of Florida. Now, we knew that was going to increase as he started going and finding people or what have you. But earlier today, when I was going to report on this, it had the number at 68 dead in the states. Well now, according to Let's See, just a few hours ago, so it's probably bigger than this or larger than this. CNN had reported that the number of people killed in Florida by Hurricane Ian had risen to at least 100 on today, Monday. So 54 of them just in Lee County alone. It was 42. Just an hour before that. So a dozen more deaths found or people found dead are reported here. But this is where Ron DeSantis is not alone. It says leadership, but it's people acting under leadership. Linemen have reportedly restored power for roughly 2 million customers. And Ron DeSantis has Florida in the aftermath of Hurricane Ian last week. The governor said yesterday, the powerful storm rocked Florida's west coast as a Category 4 storm. So as I reported before, they had all these linemen, they were ready to go and go, they went and they worked hard. But they were lined up and ready, Like DeSantis already had a plan when Ian was coming. And they executed that plan. Of course, he didn't go in and put the power on. But he had, and his people had prepared properly for this. The number of customers without power is now well under 1 million. It's roughly 600,000 that remain without power. That's a lot of people. But supposedly, it was 3.5 million power customers that were that power at one point, or over the course of N from 3.5 million to 600,000. That is one hell of a record now. It's going to be tough in the counties. Hardest hit the Charlotte and reconnects are really going to likely have to be rebuilt. The governor said that the Charlotte and Lee reconnects are really going to likely have to be rebuilding of that infrastructure. Because they were hit hard. So it's going to be very difficult, and Lee and Charlotte counties are going to have to rebuild it. And he is being praised by many for his preparation. And so are the linemen who were beastly out there doing their thing. Now, meanwhile, they're still calling DeSantis a racist. Very, very interesting. Now what happened now is that he has raised the bar. And now every governor is going to be judged on their response and their preparation. Like Ron DeSantis just did and demonstrated with Ian. So there you go, folks, yet another reason. As of this juncture, I'm going to be casting my vote if he runs for Ron DeSantis in 2028. That's not what's going to keep Joey, possibly, aides in the Biden administration fear hunter, and Joe Biden's shady business activities. Could doom Biden's potential campaign in 2024. Oh, is this Sean Hannity special? Is this Newsmax or ON? Or the New York Post? No, it's left the Political. Political is saying this according to Politico's Eugene Daniels. If a GOP-led House turns up the heat on Hunter Biden, it could weigh heavily in the president's decision to run for a second term. White House officials told Politico that Biden is, while the White House has said that Biden is preparing to seek re-election, but a final decision likely won't be made for several months. With the First Lady, aka the nurse handler, having an outsized influence. Aides of Biden are telling police to go, that Biden could forego another campaign if it would shield his family from hostile congressional investigations. So the White House is preparing for a red wave/red tsunami in the House. And the House already said, we've got all kinds of people. Said we've got Jim Jordan. We've got our James Comer from Kentucky, all pledging to investigate the Biden family, their business dealings when they, and their business dealings and other shenanigans, skullduggery, crimes, criminal activity, when they take power in the beginning of next year when everyone's sworn in. And Join Me wanted to go away and say, hey, I'm just not going to seek re-election. I'm too old. I'm going to retire. Oh, but there's a problem with that. Folks. Who's the replacement there? That would be Kamala Harris. Isn't that a scary thought? We may get into that in just a moment. But let's talk about the big court things happening. I've got 3 SCOTUS stories for you right now. Today. They went back today, Monday. They went back to these the first day back. And the first thing they did is they turned away an appeal from Missouri and 9 other states challenging Joe Biden's federal job mandate for healthcare workers. So last November, Joe Biden imposed a federal injection mandate on all healthcare workers, and that affected 10.4 million people. In January, the U.S. Supreme Court blocked Biden's OSHA jab mandate for private businesses with 100-plus employees. And a separate, simultaneous release ruling. The Supreme Court in a 5-4 vote allowed a similar mandate for healthcare facilities that received Medicaid and Medicare to stand. So they said, hey, you can't do this in the private sector. You can do it in the private sector if those healthcare facilities receive public monies. We know that Justice Alito, Neil Gorsuch, Amy Coney Barrett, and Clarence Thomas dissented earlier this year. And Greg Kavanaugh, who we went to fight for, has stabbed us in the back several times. This is one of the times he did that. Now, in its first session back Monday, the Supreme Court declined the challenge in an unsigned opinion. Fox News reporting, the U.S. Supreme Court on Monday declined to hear a challenge to the federal mandate for healthcare workers. On his first day back in session, the Supreme Court declined to hear an argument from Missouri, as well as 9 other states. Those other states are in Nebraska, Alaska, Arkansas, Iowa, Kansas, New Hampshire, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Wyoming. If you knew around here, folks, a little levity there. I know. It's Arkansas, and I know it's Kansas, not Coosaw. In April, the St. Louis-based U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals sent the case back to a federal judge to proceed to a trial. But Missouri then appealed to the Supreme Court. And the justice turned away that appeal today. In an unsigned opinion, the court wrote the challenges posed by a global pandemic do not allow a federal agency to exercise power that Congress has not conferred upon it. At the same time, such unprecedented circumstances provide no grounds for limiting the exercise of authorities the agency has long been recognized to have. Instead, the latter principle governs in the healthcare arena. So they're saying they don't really have a pandemic doesn't excuse them from doing this. But since the agency has been recognized to have this power in the past, we're not going to hear it. Which, of course, I think is a piss-poor argument, because that means that if a mistake has been happened, and has continued for a long time, that we just accept it, and we don't correct it. But of course, I'm not an attorney, and I have reported on this several times. This is a doctrine that often stands where they'll say, hey, look, we don't like it, but it's been upheld a few times already. It's been recognized that they have these powers. We're just going to let this one slide, or we're not going to hear the case. Pretty interesting coming from a court that overturned Roe v. Wade. Another thing that the Supreme Court did today is they declined to overturn the bump stock ban that took effect in March of 2019. That's right, the Trump bump stock ban. Now many of us are MAGA and love and appreciate the work that President Trump did. I consider to be the easily by far, not just my favorite, but the best president in my lifetime. Doesn't mean he was infallible and didn't make any mistakes or I disagree with him on anything. And many people weren't too happy about his bump stock, him citing the bump stock ban that took place in March of 2019. Firearms instructor Clark A.F. Fujian filed the suit against the ban, questioning the ATF ability and authority to classify a bump stock as a machine gun. He sued in 2019, seeking an injunction to the ban. It was successful. The case was appealed. And the United States Court of Appeal for the 10th Circuit upheld the ban. The case was then appealed to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has now left the ban in place. I didn't agree with Trump on this in 2019. I don't agree with him now. Shall not be infringed upon. Oh, but you don't need to bump stocks. That means that it tricks the mechanism into being full auto or as opposed to semi-automatic. We don't need that for criminals. We don't need that for hunting ducks. A reminder, the original intent of the Second Amendment had nothing to do with duck hunting or defending your home, unless of course you define your home, like homeland, like DHS is supposed to. And then, there might be a reason why people inside the government might want a bump stock ban. I'm just saying President Trump got that one wrong, in my opinion. Feel free to disagree with me. Put it down below. I don't need to live in an echo chamber. And look, I've said this before, I'll say it again, because there'll be some folks, there'll be some trolls, it will just ignore them. Alright, the argument that the state legislators have sole power to interpret their election laws. And the process for selecting presidential electors is set to be heard by the Supreme Court. This is going to be a huge case. Why? Because the DOJ in January 6th are villainizing how people in prison in a DC gulag as insurrectionists, even though no one's been charged with insurrection, for merely thinking that, hey, maybe state legislators and state legislatures actually had this power. Why? Oh, I don't know. Maybe because Article 1, Section 4, the Constitution reads, "The times, places, a manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof." Oh, maybe they question, or maybe they're questioning of certain things a couple years. Whether you believe it, look, at this point. Let's just put aside who I'm not, who cares, it is important. But this is put aside whatever you think about the results from a couple years ago. That's not what this is about. This actually has to do with a case, not even having to do with the 2022 elections. The dispute is Moore versus Harper. And it's about the congressional redistricting in North Carolina. Okay, so this has nothing to do with the 2020 race. Okay, this has to do with congressional redistricting in North Carolina. However, its implications will affect the arguments made about the 2020 contest. I'm choosing my words wisely here, folks. So you guys can understand I'm mainly talking about who is or who wasn't, who isn't legitimate, who is illegitimate. Victor. From a couple years ago, I'm talking about as I have my brothers and sisters who are protesters sitting in a DC gulag being villainized as insurrectionists by the January 6th committee. Rhinos, man. I can't stand those bastard rhinos. Stabbing us in the back all the time. Yes, I know a lot of these rhinos are actual Democrats who have run as Republicans. I've exposed this for well over a year. I do believe in the Constitution, and protesters have a right to protest based on their belief of the Constitution. And the Supreme Court is so designed that not the January 6th committee, not rhinos, not Democrat, Marxists, not hard progressives. The Supreme Court is going to hear this. This is absolutely fantastic. In recent weeks, the Department of Justice has served subpoenas and search warrants on dozens of individuals who have argued that presidential electors don't automatically have to be certified by the VP. Okay, they're making this a crime, yet the Supreme Court is saying, hold up a second, we're going to take up this case. This is not an automatic thing. The subpoenas have been part of an inquiry into alternate slates. I'm not going to give you any more reporting of that portion of it because I don't want to be misinterpreted by this platform. Okay. But this is going to be a huge case, because it's going to determine if questioning this, and it's going to sell the rights of the electoral argument that the DOJ in the January 6th is villainizing everyone as insurrectionist just for pointing out that that's what the Constitution says. Speaking of the Supreme Court, we know that they overturned Roe v. Wade. And this was what's going on right now. According to NPR, the far left outlet that we are far left are not support with our taxpayer money. This is what Planned Parenthood is going to be doing with hundreds of millions of our tax dollars. With a growing number of patients in states that now prohibit traveling for the procedure. Planned Parenthood says they will soon open its first mobile clinic for pregnancy termination services in the country in southern Illinois. Quote, our goal is to reduce the number of miles that people are having to travel now in order to access care, and meet them where they are. So they are going to be setting up mobile termination clinics at red state borders. And we're getting to pay for it. By the way, folks, yesterday was the 1-year anniversary of NASCAR driver Brandon Brown winning a race and everyone's saying expletive, Joe Biden, and it being interpreted as or misinterpreted. Or did it on purpose as let's go Brandon, which is now a euphemism for expletive, Joe Biden. Wow. And let's end with this, folks. As bad as Joey is, boy, are people terrified of the alternative. That's what I got for you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to leave a like and possibly subscribe to the channel. If you're up for it, I'm gonna get back to work.